When we typically think of hormones, we often associate them with our menstrual cycle, fertility, pregnancy. And for those in perimenopause or menopause, we may think about the loss of these aspects. However, have you ever considered that menopause might be brain related? What many women may not realize is that our bodies have hormone receptors throughout, all over our organs, including our brain. Joining me today to explore whether menopause has a basis in the brain is fellow Canadian Dr. Fiona Lovely. Dr. Fiona Lovely is a women's health expert with specialties in functional medicine, functional neurology, and restorative endocrinology. She has lectured on the topics of women's health, hormone balance, and brain function extensively. She's the creator and the host of the popular long-running podcast on the passage of perimenopause called Not Your Mother's Menopause. 1 million+ people around the world have downloaded the podcast, listening in to learn about the physical, mental, and spiritual journey of menopause. Her mission is to share info to empower women and pull back the curtain to reveal the goodness that is possible at midlife. She has a vision of the time where the world is a kinder, gentler place, and the taboos of menopause no longer exist. And amen to that. And welcome, Dr. Fiona.
Thank you very much, Karen. I appreciate you having me on the podcast.
Well, we are just like, we're already soul sisters because we have the same mission in life.
Yes, it's true. It's true. As I said to you earlier, it's like those of us that get called to the mat by the goddess, we have to say yes.
We have to. Yes. And it's people like us that are leading the charge on this, that are trying so desperately to get the word out to women. And I don't know about you and your practice and with your podcast, but I'm always thinking like, it's really getting out there. Like my word is getting out there. I've got 1 million+ downloads too. And so I always get super hopeful, but then still all day long, every day, anywhere I go, I'm hearing from women that they don't have this information. So I feel like, yes, word is spreading, but we need to spread it farther and wider.
Amen.
Amen. Yeah.
Well, the women are half the population of the planet.
Yeah.
And we're decades behind in medical research for women, not just women in menopause, but women altogether, but especially for women in menopause.
Especially. Yes. And I always say, if this was a man's problem, I don't think that we would be so in the dark as we are as women when it comes to this transition through menopause.
Oh, you are being so kind.
Oh, I'm not usually.
Okay.
I always say, if a man's penis started to shrivel up at age 40 and he didn't want to have sex and he was depressed and anxiety ridden and couldn't sleep and was getting fat, would we be here today where we are with women? No, it would be a completely different story. People would be jumping all over it. The research would be like gone crazy to try and figure out solutions to these men's problems.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and I think well, her name is escaping me. The You Are Not Broken podcast urologist. Kelly is her first name. And I'm sorry, I apologize. I've forgotten her last name. It's just totally escaped me. But in one of her episodes recently, she said, here I was prescribing whatever I could for a 70-year-old man whose penis wasn't getting hard anymore. But I had women coming into the practice that were 48 and saying, my vagina is dry, I'm leaking, sex is painful. And I was sending her away and saying, go find yourself an acupuncturist, get used to it. It's your time of life. So there's a lot of stuff that we have to there's a lot of backtracking we have to do. There's a lot of us that need to get caught up, and especially the medical professionals. They're absolutely operating from old information.
Yeah, or no information at all.
Oh, that's true.
We could do a whole podcast on just this, but
yes, we could.
But I want to talk to you about how menopause is brain related. So can you explain that?
Yeah, certainly. So first of all, the hypothalamus and pituitary are the master glands of the endocrine system, and they are in the brain. So the question about is menopause brain related is yes, absolutely it is. And so these hormones that emerge from pituitary and hypothalamus signal ovaries and the other glands of the body to operate in such a fashion. Now, the question then becomes, sure, we've got this finite egg storage. And when we run out of eggs, we stop menstruating. At least that's always sort of been the belief there. But there's a very fine dance between the ovaries and the hypothalamus, pituitary, ovarian, adrenal axis, and or the HPAO or HPO axis you hear it referred to, and that's really important. I think another thing to talk about here too is the effect of the egress of hormones, specifically the female hormones of estrogen and progesterone, and their gross effects on the brain. I mean, sure, we can talk about heavy menstrual periods or skipping periods or low libido or joint pain, all of these other things that go along typically with what we call as perimenopause or menopause. But really, brain fog is a really big one. And I know I've struggled with this myself.
Me too.
And it's awful. Like my whole life is based on my ability to bring information up when someone asks me a question. And so when that response is blunted, I'm foobarred.
Yes. Yes.
So I had to figure it out for myself real fast.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I'm like, I hit menopause very early in my early 40s, and I had to literally like figure, like I had to get, it was mind blowing what happened to me, really, because I thought, oh, I will sail through this time, no problem. I'm so healthy. I can do this. Like, and I feel like I had every symptom under the sun when it came to menopause. So yeah. Let's talk about that though. Let's talk about what are the symptoms then that are brain based that happen in perimenopause, because I don't think a lot of women put those two together until somebody says, hey, actually you can have mental issues, like you can be depressed and you can have all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, but like sex drive, hot flashes. So let's talk about some of these symptoms.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to find my notes. I recently interviewed Andrea Donsky, another Canadian awesome gal. It's talking about perimenopause and menopause. And if you don't follow her on TikTok, please do. She's quite the phenom over there. And she listed off the top 10 symptoms of perimenopause. And by her research that her company, which is We Are Morphus, does. And I looked at those and I thought, when she read them out on our podcast, I thought, oh my goodness, of the 10, there's an argument for 9 of them to be brain-based.
Wow.
And like, fascinating, right? Why aren't we talking about this? So how do you support? Then the question becomes, okay, well, how do you support brain function? So I first want to just address something that I hope isn't controversial. I'm hearing a lot about this reverse menopause phenomenon. You guys, you can't reverse it. It doesn't happen.
No.
It's not something that you can just take a pill and keep going. Like, it doesn't work that way. Sure, we can add hormones back in that are not nearly the physiological level that we have when we're in our reproductive cycles and reproductive era, but we can add them back in such a way that we have the health benefits and the health protection benefits of it. This is estrogen and progesterone I'm talking about. But the truth is, there is no reversing it. You're not starting up your cycle again. You're not finding eggs that weren't there. I mean, that process is very well documented.
Yeah. I always say you can't diet your way out of ovarian loss. Like you can't fast, you can't meditate, you can't supplement.
No,
it's going for each and every one of us.
No, although I've seen a number of women reverse vaginal dryness with intermittent fasting. So as for that mechanism, I'm like, I know, I want to do research on that.
Yes. I'm sure there isn't any.
No, of course not. Well, and just to talk about research for a second, like I believe it was 93 or 96 that the clitoris was actually added as a sexual function anatomy.
Yep.
Can you imagine? That's in our lifetimes.
And it was like from some doctor in England, I think, a female doctor who insisted on it. Like
Yeah.
was like, we got to put this in the medical books. Like, this is
100%.
ridiculous.
She's like, hey, this is the pleasure organ for women. Why is it absent? The men's pleasure organ is there. And oh, by the way, we all start out with clitoris
Yeah.
that then does differentiate into a penis in the
penis.
presence of testosterone, not the other way around. I just want to point that out.
Exactly. We don't start with a penis and it doesn't shrink to our clitoris.
No, not at all. Not at all. So, you got to take a look, to go back to the brain for a second. The brain is the place to look for how are we living our lives? Are we living it well? It turns out there's levers of health that we can pull to, I want to say, improve our experience of perimenopause, although to be honest with you, a lot of that is genetically dictated, although we have the lifestyle of levers to pull there so that they may not express. I don't know how much you knew about your family history. I knew nothing about my grandmother's menopause experiences.
No, nothing.
My mom had a hysterectomy at the age of 40 because
Same
she
with
had
mine.
heavy bleeding. So I was so now I get to share the experience of my body with my nieces, but they don't have that information that goes back any farther than our generation. And anyways, so looking at those levers of health and pulling them to make sure that the brain is functioning well, I think is not just important for our passage into perimenopause and menopause, but it's also a really important thing to look at in terms of what is our Alzheimer's and dementia risk.
Yeah. Which is what? Tell us.
Yeah. So it turns out that the egress of estrogen in particular for the women that have the genetics or sometimes the physiology, you've had Dr. Bredesen on the program, so there are different types of Alzheimer's, and depending on the mechanism there, not just in genetics, but maybe it's a vascular, or maybe it's inflammatory, or etc. Okay. Maybe it's a blood sugar handling problem, which so often it is. That's why we're talking about calling it type 3 diabetes. Yeah. Fascinating, right?
It is.
That's how important it is to manage blood sugar well in midlife and beyond, certainly before too, but midlife and beyond. But so the egress of estrogen in particular seems to almost act as a switch for women who have the correct anatomical and physiological environment for Alzheimer's, meaning now the cascade happens. So you've heard it said that Alzheimer's starts 20 years before we start to see symptoms.
Yeah.
This is where we are at. We're literally at this place. And this is Lisa Mosconi's research out of Cornell University. Her book is glorious, called The XX Brain. Her research is phenomenal. Yes, it's beautiful. And she's working with Maria Shriver and the Women's Alzheimer's Movement, or WAM.
Yeah.
And so really great research. Again, it has to be the ladies coming in and getting the stuff done, right? Because we want to know for ourselves. And Lisa, her story is that her grandmother had Alzheimer's and she didn't, she wanted to know what was behind that. So anyways, estrogen, as it leaves the building, we lose plasticity, which is a connection piece. So that's the brain's ability to mold to new environments, to new situations, etc. We call that plasticity. We lose neurons when estrogen goes away. It also decreases cerebral blood flow. And the egress of estrogen, as I said, seems to have some kind of a switch for women who have the ApoE3 or the ApoE4 gene, which is the genetic mutation that we see associated with Alzheimer's in particular. And so Alzheimer's is a type of dementia. There are many types of dementia. Dementia is a symptom of Alzheimer's, so that's a bit confusing, but it can be either of those things. That's why I talk about them together. But essentially, that's what's happening.
And so you're saying basically estrogen and the loss of it is like flipping, it's an epigenetic switch, would you say? Like where it's like, okay, so if you've got these predispositions for possibly getting Alzheimer's or dementia, which I have, the ApoE4 genes, I have 2 copies. And so this is, as my estrogen starts to drop, this can flip on those switches.
Yes.
So that the
Yes.
loss of estrogen is now making it so that I am starting to possibly head down that road of
Correct.
developing Alzheimer's.
Correct.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
Karen, you know this, if you've got both copies, you're at about a 40 to 50% increased risk. So when I see that, what I want to invite you to think about it as is this is so much more important for you to pull those lifestyle levers. Because as Mark Hyman says, genetics loads the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. Right?
Yeah.
We love that in functional medicine. We love that saying because it's so appropriate. Just because you have it in your genetics means you are at an increased risk, but it does not guarantee that it's going to show up.
Yeah.
I have it too. I've
Yeah.
got 1314. So, I pay attention to these things very closely. And when I have patients who come, you have to. I mean, if you're not going to, don't bother, get the genetic testing on it is what I say, because it'll just end up being, a burden, and you'll think that it's a good idea to lop off your boobs or have your ovaries taken out just because of the genetics. That is ridiculous. Ridiculous. So you have so much more power than we've been taught, and just pulling those lifestyle levers, really, really important. And that's true for the brain health here too. Really very critical. And again, it's all stuff we should be doing anyways. It's not anything weird or particularly hard. Like, it's just a good reminder that stick to the basics.
Yeah, exactly. I recently actually went and saw a genetic specialist. She's a naturopathic doctor here in Canada who specializes in rare genetic disorders. So she's one of the only doctors that is having a functional approach to rare genetic disorders. And she specializes, of course, of the Alzheimer's gene. And it was fascinating. She's been on my podcast. She should come on your podcast too, because she's super well versed in hormones as well as the genetics. So she put all of my puzzle pieces together for me to say, here's what your genetics tell us. Here's what you need to be doing to prevent this disease and all the other stuff that came with my genetic report, and matched it up with my hormonal profile. It was really interesting. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Dr.
Please
C.
send me her
McCanwall.
information.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I will.
Yes.
She's one of the top naturopaths in Vancouver. So she's fantastic.
Lovely.
Yeah. So when you say estrogen, I want us to be really specific about what estrogen. So when we say estrogen, everyone, there's actually three main estrogens. So estrogens is an umbrella term for these three main estrogens: estrone, estriol, and estradiol. In your research, does it specify which of those three estrogens are most important for the brain?
Yes, it's estradiol.
Thank you.
Yeah. Which the good news about that is that's actually, when we're talking about HRT as being one of the things, or HT or menopause hormone therapy, whatever, there's a bunch of different terms for it now. But if we're looking at adding those hormones back in, which if you are not looking at that for yourself, you're missing a very, very major piece. The research I was reading this morning, just to make sure this information was fresh in my mind, women who start hormone replacement therapy around the time of their period stopping, or a little just before, or a little just after, we have a 50% decreased risk of Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
Not to mention heart health benefits and bone health benefits. And this is not an unnatural thing, guys. It is the most natural thing in the world to a woman's body to have estrogen and progesterone. And I'm talking bioidentical progesterone. I'm not speaking about synthetic progestin.
Yes, we're really clear about that on this podcast.
Yep.
And it's estradiol that it has a lot of myths about it, and a lot of controversy and fear. And a lot of doctors are, I would say 95% prescribe Biest, which is primarily estriol. And we just don't see the same brain, heart, and bone benefits as we do from estradiol, from estriol. So if you've been listening to me for a while, you know that I'm a big proponent of making sure that we get estradiol to a certain level when you are in menopause. And referring to what you just said about that study, it also showed in that, I'm guessing you're talking about the Arizona study.
Mhm.
in a University of Arizona, it did
Mhm.
show that 5 year, if women replace their estradiol for 5 years or longer post-menopause, it actually went up to 70 to 75% decrease in developing Alzheimer's and dementia, which is like,
And
hello.
yes,
Like,
stop. Hold the phone right there.
right?
Like, if you didn't hear that, rewind and listen to Karen again. There is so many great benefits to keeping a physiological level of these hormones in our bodies. And look, you're going, well, but this and that, whatever else. Okay. Remember that 125 years ago, women didn't live past 50.
Yeah,
So
we
this
died
is
at menopause,
absolutely.
which says something in and of
Yes, it
itself.
does.
You lose
But
your hormones, you're gone.
you're you're belly up, you're done, you're toast. Yeah. So it's absolutely a critical thing that we're talking about this now, and it's something you need to bring up with your doctor. And yes, you're going to have quite likely some pushback from your GP, although I'm sure GPs are here in Canada, anyways, in the US as well, are hearing about this every day, all day, because our generation, we don't go quietly into the night. Gen X is kicking and screaming in Alanis Morissette fashion. We will not go quietly down. Oh, it's another Canadian girl.
Yay.
We will not go quietly. We're like, no, if I can, not to mention, Karen, if you probably saw members of your family go down to Alzheimer's and
My
dementia. I have a
grandpa.
mom.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a mother with dementia. I've got Alzheimer's on the other side of the family, so I've got it both sides. And every moment I'm with my mother, I'm angry. I'm angry because she was pulled off her hormone replacement therapy
Yeah.
when the Women's Health Initiative came out.
Yeah.
And I just tried to ask her the other day if she remembers why she stopped taking it, and she couldn't remember. But I remember, because I was somewhere in my early 20s when that happened, and thinking, well, is it safe? Do we keep doing it? Do we not? But there's a whole generation. And so the generation of the baby boomers, that generation, have every right to be mad as hell. I mean,
Yeah.
because there's so many of them that have neurodegeneration.
Yeah.
So estrogen's effect on the brain is great, and it is widespread. And what's quite fascinating is that the parts of the brain that estrogen has effect on are also the same parts of the brain that degrade in Alzheimer's.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So isn't that so? In a way, we've almost had, well, the first thing I think of the first thing that comes to mind when I think about that is Alzheimer's an estrogen deficiency problem? Okay, that's
Yeah.
opens up a whole can of worms that somebody else can say no.
Which it definitely is. No matter what, it's a huge part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Or we look at the last couple of generations, can we use them as essentially a mass research experiment where we're observational, saying, we're this cohort of women that were taken off their hormones at midlife, that's our mothers. Do they have a higher incidence of neurodegeneration than other parts of our society? And I think those numbers will be forthcoming. I mean, there's a ton of research and interest in menopause and perimenopause right now, which is great, because I have been waiting 25 years for that to show up.
Yeah.
I'm just so glad to be here to see it.
Oh, I know. I wish I had the finances to just run so many different studies, because so much of the work that's been done on hormone replacement therapy and menopause, it's really contradictory. Half the time they're saying progesterone when they mean progestin. So they're like, oh, hormones are going to kill you and give you breast cancer. But in the study, they use progestins, which is fake progesterone.
Yeah.
And when they use real progesterone, they see breast protection, they see brain protection.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
it's
so
not the same thing. It's
No.
not the same thing. So be really clear to your listeners, whoever is going to ask their doctor for HRT, you want bioidentical progesterone and topical estradiol.
Thank you.
You
Yes.
do not want to take estrogen internally.
No.
It increases the clotting factors. I mean, it's these levers that we can pull. We can say, okay, well, the Women's Health Initiative said this and this and this, but were they looking at the right thing? Turns out they weren't.
Mhm.
It was misinterpreted. And it was this massive study on this huge scale, which buried deep in that data, by the way, is the data that says women who took hormone replacement therapy had and started in their 40s and early 50s had 50% decrease in neurodegeneration, meaning Alzheimer's and dementia.
Yeah.
Why wasn't that shouted from
Why
the
not?
roof?
For a disease that they say there's no cure for, the drugs that they do
There's no
have,
pharmaceutical cure
like,
for,
there's no
right?
pharmaceutical cure, which gets
Yeah.
out to the world that there is no cure,
Yes,
right?
that's correct. Yeah.
Oh, and
Well,
so
and
estrogen as well, how it affects our blood sugar. So if Alzheimer's is also type 3 diabetes, your hormones are also going to drive that mechanism as
Mhm.
well, because with the loss of estrogen, we become more insulin resistant.
Yes, absolutely. And you get the cortisol piece in there too. There's just a lot of different things. But you brought up something about the um, not having a pharmaceutical response that's even remotely effective. Because you've had Dr. Bredesen on the program, you know that he has this reversal plan, and it works. But let me tell you, there's a lot of pieces and parts to it, and it's not accessible care for most people because it's private pay, private testing, high organic foods and that sort of thing. And we're, living in a time where people are struggling to pay the bills, are struggling to pay, pay for their groceries or the rent. Some don't even have a home. And we're talking about, take all this fancy testing that'll cost you X number of dollars. By the way, I have a functional medicine colleague nearby who charges $100,000 for that program.
You are
Meaning,
kidding.
if
Oh,
you want to
wow.
have him help you reverse your neurodegeneration, he'll do it, but it'll cost you $100,000 for that. This is how valuable this information is. What if you never needed to engage that care because you started taking the protection piece seriously at midlife? This is the magic time. This is when we can really make change. We don't wait for the diagnosis.
No, no. Besides the Alzheimer's dementia piece, another really big factor when it comes to how our hormones influence our brain is mental health.
Mm.
And we see that women, like in the studies, it does show us that the highest rates of suicide are women in menopause.
Yeah.
Uh, Tell us about how are these hormones
Mhm.
affecting our neurotransmitters and our mental health?
Yeah, so I believe the most recent number I've read is that suicide rates for women jump 60% after the age of 50. So what we know is that the egress of hormones, specifically estrogen here, although progesterone does play a role as well,
Yeah.
changes the serotonin cascades in particular. So um,
Serotonin being very crucial for mood.
oh yeah, that's the feel good hormone, right? And if you, Karen, did you get a chance to watch the Oprah Daily show on the menopause when she had the menopause experts on?
I think so. It was a long time ago, right?
No, this is the one that
Oh,
would just like 3 months ago.
oh no, I
She had,
didn't.
yeah, she had Drew Barrymore on. It's totally worth the subscription
Okay.
to watch it. It was so good. And she had Sharon Malone on from Alloy. I think she's Alloy.
Yeah.
And one other MD OBGYN from the States, as well as Maria Shriver. And one of the things that Oprah talked about was that she just kind of got to this point in her perimenopause and early menopause where she was like, whatever, whatever. And she just didn't feel excited about anything anymore. And then for somehow she got told her doctor this, and her doctor gave her estrogen instead of an antidepressant. Okay. So estrogen works on the serotonin, right? So if there's not estrogen, then adding SSRI, which keeps the serotonin flooded in the system, but say your serotonin's already low, those are the common antidepressant medications, it's not going to work. Your problem, if you're feeling whatever in midlife. And I've certainly had this come up. Like
Me
I'm a
too.
fairly, yeah, it's awful. I'm a fairly enthusiastic human being. And then all
Mhm.
of a sudden you just kind of realize that you could give a shit. Like you're
Yeah.
just like, whatever, whatever,
Yeah. You
whatever.
feel flat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
you know what it
And
was for
and
me?
some severely depressed and anxiety ridden too. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so this is a very common experience. And because we're so baked in a culture that says, if you're feeling low, you must need an antidepressant,
Mhm.
that's what you end up with. This is not a problem of an antidepressant medication. This is a problem of low hormones. So I know there's somebody out there right now who's listening who's like, yeah, but I can't take the hormones because of breast cancer. Listen, the information that's out there, the most contemporary information that's out there right now says protection for women with breast cancer. If you do show up with breast cancer while you're taking our HRT, you're more likely to have a good outcome. It's protection. It's the same with the heart. 1 in 2 of us will die from heart disease, but we don't hear about that so much because it doesn't have the big marketing campaign behind it with the pink ribbons and all that business.
Yeah.
That's another conversation
Oh,
for another
yes.
day.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
I think there might need to be a cocktail with that
I
one.
think so. Yeah.
Sorry, I got a bit close to the mic there. Got a little
Absolutely.
excited. Anyways, here's my tangent. But when Oprah was saying she got this whatever thing, the doctor prescribed her the estradiol gel, which she applied. And she said right away, she noticed that her verve for life came back. So it's good to know that it's not just us average, plebes that have these issues. It's people like Oprah as well, right?
Yes. Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's a very common thing. Chances are, if you are feeling low and you are somewhere in your late 30s, 40s, or 50s, or even your early 60s, that hormones would be a better choice for you, depending on your family history, depending on your health history. Of course, your doctor has to assess that for you, than an antidepressant.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And it does show, I know you're a big fan also of Avram Blooming and,
Yes.
and his work, he's showing that women that are post breast cancer, if they replace their estradiol, have a less chance of reoccurrence of that cancer.
Yes, absolutely. What Karen's talking about is a book called Estrogen Matters. If you have a very resistant doctor to talking about HRT, buy them a copy and take it to them, because it's not only going to help yourself, but it's going to help legion of women.
Yeah.
If every woman takes their doctor a copy of that book, because it's doctors speak using the data saying, here's the argument for hormones, no matter we're talking about brain or heart or breast cancer, which is, of course, what brought Dr. Blooming to the table in this conversation. Although I think he's an oncologist.
He
Is
is
he
an
not?
oncologist.
Yes. Okay. Have you
Yeah.
interviewed him?
I tried, and I actually approached Carol
Yes.
when he co-wrote the book with. And she said that they were not doing interviews at that time. Now, this was a few years ago, and I have noticed that he has been doing interviews. He just did one with Alloy, and
Yes.
he's doing one with Dr. David Rosensweet
Perfect.
in a few weeks on their podcast. So I think he's maybe coming back.
Yes.
So I would like to have him on for sure.
Yeah, and he just did an interview with the You Are Not Broken podcast as well. I'm
so
just
there
looking
you
that
go.
up.
So I bet he is then. I'm going to have to, we're going to have to reach out and get him on our podcasts.
It's Kelly Casperson. There, I got it.
Kelly Casperson. Yes, I've heard of her. Yeah.
My brain wanted to go Kelly Clarkson. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I know that's not right.
Not Kelly Clarkson.
No, it's not. But Kelly Casperson's podcast and book are excellent. And they're called You Are Not Broken. So good. So good.
Yes,
Love
I've
her.
listened to them before.
So good.
So do you know much about the influence of estradiol on dopamine?
You know what? I don't off the top of my head, but
I know there's an interaction there.
No doubt. No doubt. Yeah. Nope, not coming to mind.
Yeah. I wish I knew more exact. And I've heard I heard a psychologist talking about it on Louise Newson's podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fascinating because she is this psychologist who always uses hormones with her patients. And she talks about the connection between estradiol and dopamine. And there is somehow an influence that estradiol does help with dopamine production. So
No
that
doubt.
tells us then that if dopamine's going low also, so we've got dopamine going down, which is giving us that pleasure in life, that oomph, and serotonin is being influenced. And then we know that progesterone can influence GABA, which is
Yes.
another neurotransmitter, which
Yes.
is very
That's right.
anti-anxiety. So
Yeah.
this is just like
And
the recipe for
anti-aging.
hot mess
Yes,
all
it
over the
is.
place.
It is. Because estrogen is sort of it like revs everything up. So no matter which of the neurotransmitters you're looking at, it just kind of doubles down on everything. And it's not so much of a more is not necessarily better situation, but again, it's that modulatory effect. You not only have the protective effect of estrogen, but you have the enhancing effect and the connectivity effect. Really, really important.
Really important. And I heard you on your podcast talking about how, we assume that the sex drive libido piece that happens in perimenopause, that we all assume that it's like because it's
In
affecting
there.
in
Yeah.
there down in our
Basement.
nether regions.
Yes.
And then
Basement instead of the attic, right?
exactly. But yet it has attic
Yeah.
influence. So talk
Absolutely.
about that.
Okay, so if you think back to the time, let's say maybe it was, I don't want to say pre-babies if people that are listening to the podcast have children, but you think about when you were in your sort of sexual prime, it didn't take much to get things going. But as you got busier in your life, and perhaps you and your partner had been together a long time, maybe you started having kids, maybe you started having your own issues, what was the sexiest thing your partner could do? Do the dishes, take the garbage out, right? Sweep the floor. Sexy,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
My
So
husband has to try way harder these days. But anyways, that's like the start of it. The truth is the brain is the biggest and most important sex organ. So taking care of the emotional health is a really, really important part of that. So it's
yeah. Especially for women, we're so
yeah, oh yeah.
emotionally based people, like
Oh yeah. Yeah,
race,
where
whichever
guys
you
are
want to
just
call
physical,
it.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Like we need the brain stuff. Like my husband just said to me recently, he's like, oh, I'm so happy kids are going back to school. We can get back to,
Afternoon delight.
afternoon delight. We'll call it that. And I was like, at that time, I had been so busy in my work. And I was like, oh my God, I have no sex drive at all. I got to really take care of my stress here, because when I am stressed, it is like that door is closed. It's like I have zero desire for sex.
Yeah. And when we're younger, what happens is we've got all these hormones up and down, right? The ocean of hormones is constantly waves in, waves out, right? So even if you didn't feel like it, you could manage to get it up, basically.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But as soon as menopause happens, late perimenopause, forget it. Your ability to get it up, so to speak, is not there. It's just not there.
So
Agreed?
much harder. So
Yes.
much harder.
It is. It is. Listen, and there's not a woman that I don't, there's no one that I know that couldn't tell me that they've had to endure sex for keeping the peace.
Oh, I hear it all the
Right?
time. Yeah.
So exactly. So if we talk about the trauma of that, that is a trauma, right? Trauma plays a big part in pelvic health, in women's health, in brain health, I mean, there's just so many things, right? It's important, as you said, that get up and go isn't necessarily there, but if the interest is there, then one of the best things you can do to sort of fire up your libido in the moment is to do some sort of nervous system calming exercise, to do some safety breathing, right? I remember hearing years and years ago, it was Dr. Northrup I heard this from, who was incredibly influential for me when I was a young woman.
Me too.
Yeah, right? Like,
Yeah.
thank God for her. Talk about being called to the mat by the goddess. She said, women who are having troubles achieving orgasm, invite them to put socks on. Socks make you feel safe.
Wow.
When your feet are cold, you don't feel safe. Isn't that
Wow.
fascinating?
That is. I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
We'll be
So
like
now
this.
we
It's
know. We know
always
why that
cheesy when
is.
we think of the men wearing socks during
Oh,
sex.
totally.
Now it's
And
us
that's just
women.
because they didn't want to take the time to take them off. Right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh, remember those days? Wasn't that sweet?
Now we're going to go pull on our big woolly socks. Hold on,
Yeah.
husband.
Yes, exactly. I'm going to
Wife.
show you the ultimate.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not the high stocking. It's the woolly socks.
Yeah. I
So
find
now
it.
we
Yeah.
know now why that happens. But back when she said it and was talking about safety, we didn't understand, that constant fight or flight that comes from being a woman in a society where women are second in charge. We're behind the man. We're in a patriarchy, whether we like it or not. And
Mm-hmm.
no matter how our partnerships are, no matter how we were raised, it still affects us to some degree. By the way, I understand the Barbie movie handles this pretty well. I haven't seen it yet. Have you?
Oh, no, I haven't.
Yeah,
I'm
apparently
surprised.
talks about the patriarchy. Yeah. And some of my favorite super intelligent women are the ones that are going to see it 2 or 3 times. So it's not
Oh,
just for little girls, apparently.
all
Maybe we need to have the
right.
producer on the show. What do you think?
Yeah, that would be
Yeah,
nice. Maybe it's the actor too, Ryan Gosling. That would be okay.
yeah, that would be terrible. I mean, isn't he Canadian?
He is, I think. He is.
Yeah, or get it
Yeah.
mixed up with Ryan Reynolds, another Canadian.
Yes.
The good ones.
Yes.
Anyway, so we know now that when we manage the fight or flight response in our bodies, we can manage it in a moment. We can access a whole lot of higher functions. So when we're talking about the brain, that's all frontal lobe activity. And we can't reach those higher functions of our brain if we're in fight or flight, which is an amygdala or a stress response or limbic response, right? We get stuck in a place where we're just safety, 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 safety. And when you are in safety mode, you cannot be in creativity. You cannot be in connection. You cannot be in communion with the divine, right? You cannot, you can't access it. So when you hear that, you probably are thinking about some previous relationships you've had, whether with men or women, primary relationships or friendships. Sometimes people just cannot access it because we're starting to really realize the importance and long-term effects of being traumatized. And it's a physical thing, it's a brain thing. So basically, if you want sexy time, you have to encourage safety first, which is an inside job.
Wow. I
Yeah.
didn't, that's very powerful. Let's just repeat that, everybody, that you cannot have that connection
Nope.
if you are stuck in fight or flight.
Yeah.
Which
Yep.
I feel like I'm stuck in fight or flight a lot.
You cannot access that part of your brain. So it's not even like I'll just willpower through it, which we're really good at.
Yeah.
And like women are so good at that. Like we're amazing at it. But you can't just willpower yourself into that place. You literally have to signal your brain. And the way to do it is to do some sort of embodiment technique. Very easy. It can be safety breathing. It can be the jiggle. It can be jumping up and down or side to side sway. One of my favorites is to lay face down on my yoga mat and just rock my hips back and forth. That is so powerful. It just discharges all kinds of things and brings your nervous system to calm, to safety, to peace. And from there, you can have the conversation with your partner about intimacy. You can connect with your bestie on a different level. You can hug your children from a different place. Estrogen has effect on all of these things too, by the way. So it's important to bring that one back home.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And, we tend to, as women, when we hear about, oh, we need to do self-care, we need to, lower our stress, we're just all like, oh yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like running on high. This is how I do my best. And it's like, yeah, your body doesn't think that.
That's a masculine response. We were taught that. That's divine masculine. We were not taught the divine feminine, which is to be in our bodies. Our bodies tell us everything we need to know. Right. Yeah. So, but we've been hyper intellectualized. That is part of how the trauma response has affected women. Whereas, in historical places, we see the goddess being honored for her body in its voluptuous nature.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I know for myself, and a friend of mine actually gave me this advice probably 10 years ago, which was she was talking about when throughout her cycle, when she was menstruating, when did she feel like having sex? Obviously, first half of the cycle around ovulation, she was all for it with her husband. She said, but in the second half of my cycle, she's like, I just did not have a desire for sex. So I had to go into it with the intention of, this isn't to have an orgasm and get off and have like this great, time. It's to connect with my partner. And
Yes.
when she saw it like that, she said she had such an easier time to have sex. And I still do that with myself to this day, even though now I'm almost through to menopause. When I don't feel like it, or when I'm in that fight or flight response, which is a lot, and I want to go, my husband wants to have sex. And instead of just going, okay, I guess I'll just do this, I instead go, I need to connect with my husband. I need to just have that love. I need to de-stress. I need to just be held, whatever it is. And I go into it with a different intention. And I feel like that takes me out of the fight or flight so I can have that moment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Being around calm people in trusting relationships is another way you can regulate your nervous system. Right. Even if we can't reach the place that's other than fight or flight, we can be physically close to somebody who is calm. And then we can sort of piggyback on that, which is a really nice way to do it. But I think something else to talk about there is that, we have this belief that our heteronormative sex is erect penis inside juicy vagina, right?
Yep. Yeah.
There's so many other things to explore. But you have to have that conversation with your partner, because men in particular, if we're talking about heterosexual relationships, men in particular are taught that, it's the erection, it's the how erect is it, and how long can he last, and can he ejaculate? And it's like, okay, listen, if we focus on a woman's body instead, there's so many things to explore, right? And the men get to go along with it. And I know that's a big leap for people. It's a huge leap for people, but at least maybe if your listeners haven't heard that, this is opening the door to start to have that conversation with your partner.
Yes, I agree. I think that's a great tip. And if women could start seeing it a little bit differently and their partners could start seeing it a little bit differently, I think that would help. It must be nice to be in a gay relationship as a woman, hey, with another woman. Like
you think
you would really understand each other, I think, a lot more.
Except you both cycling at the same time, though, that could be a bit of a nightmare.
My friend,
except there's no pressure, right? During that
there's
time,
no pressure.
right?
Yes,
no pressure.
My friend, she says that her and her wife don't cycle together, and she says it just sucks. She's like, we're on these different times in our cycle, and I'm like, why can't you guys got to sync up? Like, come on.
Yeah.
So before we go, because we're going to run out of time here, and I'm going to have you back on the show, Fiona. Your last name is very suiting. You're very lovely. So
thank you.
Tell us about this new program that you have coming up for women about the brain.
Yes, indeed. So it's called the Brain Health Master Course for Women. It is my flagship course. I do run it, enrollment for it once a year. This is my third year offering it. I update the information constantly. So there's basically, I talked about the levers of health, and I've created a framework that is the levers of brain health. And this is especially true for women in the menopause transition. So basically, if you're anywhere from 38 to pushing up daisies, this is good information for you. Prior to that, there's other information that you can reach out to. Chances are your brain's probably not bothering you so much if you're younger than late 30s. But yes, it's an 8-week course. You watch the videos that I have recorded and sent you, and there's a supportive community, and it's just so fun to be in a group of women, like talking to women about women's health.
I love
oh my
it.
God, like
yeah, it's my favorite.
It's the best.
Yeah.
Like, it's seriously the best. It's my favorite too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I get so jazzed for it,
Me
which
too.
is so cool, right? There's so many of us that are like this, but this is my favorite thing, is to sit and talk about it and actually have a honest discussion and share experience and get some expertise for sure, but really community. Our brains are
Community.
hardwired for community, and we have just come out of an isolating time, and it's showing in our physical and mental health. So reaching out, creating connections with other people that have similar interest, really important. That's a big piece of the Brain Health Master Course. You can find out about it on my website, drlovely.com. And if you go to the offerings page, there'll be a place you can follow along. And I just recorded a webinar for it last weekend. Again, so fun to have a group of women to chat with. And the replay is available there too. Thank you for asking.
Oh, so it is there. I tried to get it. I signed up hoping that I would get the access to it because it was last week, but
Yeah.
I'll go. Yeah. So I'll go back in and see where, because can you put in your email as though you're signing up for it, and then it'll be the replay sent to you? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah. So go into your email box and take a look at the emails that have been sent out. And there's a new link that got put up this week from my VA that will just give you direct access to it.
Okay, perfect. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like an incredible course. It's one of the only that I've heard of that is a brain-based menopausal, perimenopausal course,
Yes.
which, as we've said here today, menopause is a brain-based disease. No, I wouldn't say disease, but
Phenomenon.
phenomenon.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a brain-based phenomenon. Sure is. Sure is.
And how much it influences. And we need our brain, ladies. We do. It's the most important thing. So please check it out. And you are on TikTok, Instagram at
Dr. Fiona Lovely.
Fiona Lovely. And I'm going to link to all of this in the show notes, ladies. So don't worry. And I look forward to coming on your podcast in the new year.
Yes, please.
And so that I get to talk to you again. And I look forward to having you back on my show when we have a little bit more time.
I would love to come back.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.